Welcome to another episode of What's Happening, Education and COVID-19. And I'm pleased today to have Melissa Emler joining me. And Melissa wears a lot of different hats, I think. And I'd love her to just introduce herself and just share a little bit about herself and where she is and what those hats might be.
Thanks for having me, Dean. This is super exciting. I do wear a lot of hats. I live in Southwest Wisconsin in a very rural area, and my primary job is I work at a regional service agency as the director of innovation. And so I'm very busy with that work. We support 31 schools, about 20,000 students, and about 2,500 teachers. Also in that role, I serve as the statewide, I have two roles at a statewide level. I am the Universal Design for Learning statewide systems coach. And I also work on like the statewide technology coordinator work. So it's other people like me. We have 12 service agencies in our state. And so it's all the other people like me get together quite a bit right now. And then I also run Modern Learners, which is a very interesting vantage point that I bring to the work in the statewide work, and also in the agency that I serve locally. So it's wild times.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the first role and the service in the regional service center. What is occupying most of your time right now?
Yeah, so I would say it's the emergency response piece. For years, I've been one of those tech integrators and bringing people along at a very painstakingly slow pace for what seemed like forever. And then one day, everybody just needed me. And not because they chose to need me, but because they needed me to help them level up really fast. So we've done a lot of emergency response support kind of work in terms of we did lots of trainings on Zoom and Google Meets, and we also use Blue Jeans. So we had to train on the back end of those settings and make sure, we're thinking about all of those things as teachers began to use those tools on a regular daily basis. And we actually have Schoology across the region. And that was a decision we made about 3 years ago as part of our distance learning network, that we thought we would be more effective in sharing regional resources if we were all in the same learning management system across the region. And people's level of adoption of that learning management system is certainly varied, but having a single system really proved to be amazing, amazingly helpful for our region. That doesn't mean that we don't still have people, just because of the learning curve, using like Google Classroom, or at the elementary level, we're seeing schools use C-SAW. So we're supporting that work as well. So lots of that emergency stuff. The interesting thing about our region and the work in Wisconsin in general is that the statewide technology group that I'm a part of, we actually created a virtual learning plan systemic implementation support system a year ago right now. And so we had been training people and pulling them through the questions that they would have to think about if they would do virtual learning for weather events or natural disasters or whatnot. So our region was extremely prepared in that we had gone through all those questions with everyone. But at the time that we did that, which was in January, and several schools had practiced already by then, but in January, we did it with all 31. And there was a third that were like, yes, we're going to use this for snow days and whatnot. And there was a third that said, oh, this is an interesting concept. We might maybe explore that. And there was a third that said, oh my gosh, we're never doing that. The board will not support that. It's never going to happen. And 6 weeks later, we're all doing it with no thought. It's just, we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been interesting.
Do you have any statistics around uptake in or traffic or anything like that that just points to, yeah, this is being utilized in ways that we couldn't imagine 6 weeks ago?
Yes. So one of our schools, I'm not sure. Trisha Lewis is on Twitter, and she's very active in the educational technology community, in the Twitter space. But she actually is a tech director at one of our schools, and she shared some data with our superintendents in the region regarding the student usage of Schoology in their district. Their district has about 700 total students, and she said that there were at least 10 students on the platform every hour, every day for a week.
Hmm.
And so that was really interesting, that it literally was a 24/7 scenario. And she said, and there were at least 10 students registered on the platform every hour. So that's just, it's just really interesting. But in terms of our numbers all over the board are just way up in terms of utilization. And we're still, can I say that they're using it perfectly or we're using all the bells and whistles? Absolutely not. I think we'll only get better. But getting people to the platform and streamlining that sense of communication has been pretty successful after the first week or two of double dosing on the communication between the learning management system and email, until people felt more comfortable just communicating in the one spot. So it's going well. It's slow, but it's going well.
So, and the question I'm always curious about is, and again, I know this isn't necessarily exactly in your role, but I know you would be much aware of the messaging. So how do what have you appreciated? What have you seen in your region, in your area, that points to some form of leadership, really messaging this in the right way that
Mhm.
empowers and comforts teachers, parents, students. So just I'm just always curious of what
Yeah.
you've heard.
So the message has been since the beginning, less is more in these moments. And that's been across the board from administration, in across our region. Everybody believes that less is more. But what I'm seeing is even when we are doing less, our communication is more.
Yeah.
And sometimes the communication is such that it's not the actual act of doing whatever is assigned or created, the opportunities that are created. It's really more a matter of the communication being more is sort of the pressure point, because they're suddenly getting all of this communication about these opportunities that are fewer, but the communication is more, so it doesn't necessarily feel fewer, feel
Mm,
less. And
interesting.
so
Yeah.
we've really helped people think through that and really streamline communication, to the best of their ability. Because the other thing we're seeing with communication is this dichotomy of the workday kind of doesn't have an end, right? So we're hearing from teachers and we're seeing on their faces in our Zoom meetings just the sheer exhaustion. And they're feeling like they work 24/7 because they work during the day planning, creating, communicating. But then what happens is their parents, the students, they get on at night and ask the questions. And so then teachers just feel like they're going to respond, right? So they feel like they need to respond sort of immediately. And so
Yeah.
that's
And
been interesting.
yeah, I hadn't thought about that before. I appreciate that point, because I think about myself as having worked remotely now for years,
Yeah,
and
me too.
I don't try to say I've figured it out or I have because everybody says, oh, you got to have a schedule, you got to do this. I don't know if there's any particular rules to it, but what I do believe is that for teachers who have spent their careers being defined by those bells and those times, and it wasn't, I mean, obviously
Hmm.
teachers worked into the evenings before, so that's not a new thing. I don't mean to say that, but I think uh, I can understand how they might feel like this just never ends. Like how do I do this? Because perhaps maybe they're a little bit more relaxed in the mornings, not quite as pressured or whatever. But it just seems to so there's a whole, I think, shift and understanding around how to work remotely and how not to. And again,
Hmm.
added to this too, it's not a great, it's an experiment and it's a
Yes.
temporary thing, because the level of panic and the level of, it's not, you're
Yes.
dealing with trauma. So
It's
I
an
understand.
emergency remote situation. It's
Yeah.
an emergency remote.
So
That's what I keep
it's
trying
hard
to explain
to
it.
completely, I feel very, vulnerable, humble. I'm not sure what the word is, but I just try not to project any, well, here's how you should do it, because number one, the situations are somewhat unique and different, and number two, what works for me in a, as a lifestyle may not apply to these times. So we
Mhm.
have to be very careful. This to your point earlier about, you know over messaging, and I feel like that's the part I'm struggle with, because I feel like you can't over message, but I hear what you're saying, is that even those best intentions of telling people it's okay, relax, hearing that too often
Yeah.
can
And
be
the ambiguity in the message is that this is all new and different. Um, and, just do what you can. And that's coming from the people, who supervise you and evaluate you and whatnot. But your obligation to serve is to the families, and you're going to respond to them when they need you and want you, and you're going to want to give them as much advice, like as much support as you can throughout. So I'm seeing a lot of over communication and a lot of communicating in different channels, and I think it's about streamlining it. One success that a couple of schools have had is, um, you know, all communication for this grade level in terms of what needs to be done goes through this person. What I'm sort of anticipating being the fallout when we come back and start to phase back in is I keep imagining like a help ticket type scenario where if parents have a question, it sort of gets submitted to like this team of people and they divvy it up to where it needs to go, but it sort of has a landing spot to then be answered by the most appropriate person. So the idea of like the central office of a building has sort of dissipated in this moment, and I think that there has to be a way to bring that back from a communication standpoint for the sanity of teachers and the speed and responsiveness of districts back to families. So I think that's just that thought process has been emerging in me as I listen to principals try to problem solve how they can use potentially teaching staff that the district has decided that the work that they're working on is optional, or we're going to prioritize reading and math. And so we have Fayed and health teachers and art and music who are students, and a huge part of students' lives, not necessarily having access, but really utilizing them in different ways to sort of support them in the off hours, or in, turning varying the schedules that people use, and then somehow getting kids to connect with everyone in a different way. And it's totally emerging, this thought process in me. So
I,
we'll see where it goes.
yeah, because I always ask people about what they think, how they think is going to play out, uh,
Hmm.
especially from what are the challenges still to come. And that's again one I haven't heard, but I think there's valid concerns around how that works. And again, we could make, the list of, we're going to be rethinking this, we're going to be talking about this and that, like
Hmm.
it continues to
And
grow.
it's certainly, we're going to rethink classroom instruction, and just we're just going to rethink instruction and that piece. But I think what's interesting about this moment is we're rethinking every level of operations. We're rethinking every level of how a school operates and functions. And we, in that rethinking and reimagining, cannot forget the practical piece of school, right? There is economic and societal needs that school fulfills. And as we rethink that, we talked today in our statewide group about phasing in the fall, and this grade comes this day and that day, but the implications that that has on families that have children in multiple grades at multiple levels of schooling has significant impact. And we can't solve for the phasing in response to COVID without really thinking about family dynamics and what that might involve.
Yeah, yeah, and again, the equity issue to me, on the one hand, it's just exasperating. Wow, there's so much to this conversation. At the same time, it does make me feel like, you know, the like you said, the practical side of it. Like we've actually we do address a lot of those equity issues when we have kids in the same room. And again, sometimes we maybe mask it. Sometimes it's not actually, it's a bit more of a band-aid just because they're sitting together. We think they're all equal, but I know that we talk about that a lot, but there is something valuable about the kid who gets to be just like everybody else for that part of the day, even though there may be a lot of things in that kid's life that is not right. But now that we see them, what is it that we can do moving forward to say, is there something we can do to help these kids with, again,
Mhm.
whatever the breadth of this
Yeah,
is.
well, and I think that potentially um, a learner's difficulties or a learner's variability, I guess is the best way to say it in my universal design language. A learner's variability isn't as on display in a virtual situation as it might be in a classroom. And so I have heard from special education teachers that they're getting so much from that their one-on-one time that sometimes, there's a lot of avoidance strategies that students use so that they don't have to go into the classroom where they get the special help and whatnot. So I'm hearing a lot of positive things about the interventions that are essentially being provided to um, learners for a variety of reasons. And I also have heard that there's some students who have so much less anxiety now that there is a contingency of people who are wondering how willingly some students will come back and how the transition back to school will be for them and what the fallout might be.
Hmm. Well, I appreciate your time. I got one last question for you is what are you hoping? I mean, there's a lot of good that could come from this, for sure, a lot of good. What's the one thing you say, gee, I really hope this is the thing that changes for the better in education?
Mhm. For me, it's putting the focus back on learning, and I want that to sort of just permeate every discussion. I want school to exist and be practical for families and serve families from that practical, economic, societal impact way. But I want the work that teachers do in schools with kids to be focused on learning. And we have an opportunity with all of the red tape in this moment essentially being removed, that's connected currently to achievement tests and standardized scores and that piece. Those kinds of things sort of shift the focus and shift the narrative to a conversation about achievement. And I really hope that this moment can support us in shifting the conversation and the narrative about school back to learning.
Well, I think you've got a lot of people joining you with that same that same desire, and I think I'm hopeful that that will help us. So thank you so much for your time and your perspectives, and it was great to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.